The case of Vicente Benavides and how his death penalty conviction unraveled is complex and stunning. Now his civil rights attorneys are alleging in a federal lawsuit that prosecutors and detectives knowingly presented false evidence to the jury that ultimately sentenced him to death.
Welcome everybody to another episode of Convoluted. I'm Jesse Asher, and today I'm going to tell you about a California man who was wrongfully convicted for the death of a 21-month-old girl, and he spent 26 years on death row. And as always, I will post the links to the sources that I used below. I do want to preface this episode by saying that some of what I discuss and have to talk about in this episode can be pretty graphic, especially since it's involving a young child. So that's your warning. Today we are looking at the unfortunate death of a very young child in the state of California in 1991, and also the wrongful conviction of Vicente Benavides. And this poor girl not only lost her life, but she was only 21 months old, so she barely got to start a life, and her name is Consuelo Verdugo. November 17th, 1991, something very tragic happened to young Consuelo in Kern County, California. Consuelo had an older sister by the name of Christina, who, according to the LA Times, was 9 years old at the time. Christina and Consuelo's mother was Estela Medina. Estela also had a boyfriend who was 42-year-old Vicente Benavides, who was a farm worker in that area. On the evening of November 17th, 1991, Consuelo's mother, Estela Medina, and Estela's boyfriend, Vicente Benavides, they brought a non-fully responsive Consuelo to the Delano Regional Medical Center in Delano, California, where they initially focused on a head bruise and some scrapes. It was also mentioned that they failed multiple times to enter a catheter, and Estela and Benavides said she might have hit her head on a door. Shortly after, Consuelo was transferred to Kern Medical Center in Bakersfield, California. And the reason she was transferred was because her stomach began to distend and her condition was beginning to get worse. And the receiving nurse who took in Consuelo noted that she had blown pupils, which is often seen in victims of blunt force trauma in a car accident or in car accidents. Upon arrival, though, attention was focused on her distended stomach, and a nurse attempted to enter a catheter, but upon attempting, she noticed a bruise on her genitalia. So a feeding tube was then inserted instead of a catheter. I'm going to quote something from the National Registry of Exonerations. Diagnostic surgery revealed that her bowel, duodenum, and pancreas were cracked in half, portions of each on either side of her spine. Now, Dr. Jess Diamond examined Consuelo the next day, finding bruising around her anus and a tear in her hymen. He also found damage to her sphincter and internal tears to her anus. And Dr. Diamond came to the conclusion the almost 2-year-old had been raped, sodomized, and beaten in the abdomen. 2 days later, on November 19th, Consuelo was transferred again to the UCLA Medical Center in Los Angeles. She had a swollen body and her kidneys were no longer functioning at the time. Another surgery was performed on Consuelo at UCLA Medical Center in Los Angeles on November 20th, 1991. And on November 20th, 1991, Vicente Benavides was arrested. Unfortunately, on November 26, 1991, Consuelo Verdugo passed away at only 21 months old. So we skip to the next month, and on December 12th, 1991, Vicente Benavides was charged with first-degree murder, rape, sodomy, and lewd conduct with infliction of great bodily harm. And about 1 year and 3 months later, on March 15th, 1993, Vicente Benavides went to trial in Kern County Superior Court. So now we're gonna get into the trial a bit. And as I stated, the trial began on March 15th, 1993 in Kern County, California. And this trial had multiple testimonies, so that is where we're going to start. Estela, the mother, she testified that on that day she changed Consuelo's diaper and then left for work around 6:40 p.m. And Consuelo and Christina, they were eating dinner when Estela left for work. About 40 minutes later, Estela received a call from the older daughter, Cristina, and Cristina told her that Consuelo was pale, sick, and couldn't breathe. Estela, naturally, she went home, and when she arrived, Vicente was holding Consuelo, and Estela then drove them to the hospital in Delano, California. Cristina, the older daughter, testified that state welfare officials removed her from the home. Police and social workers then questioned her multiple times, and Cristina testified that she had asked Vicente to play outside that day and claimed when she left that she closed the door and never saw Consuelo by the door. Cristina also testified that on the way to the hospital, Vicente told Estela that when Cristina went outside, Consuelo followed her, but Cristina brought her back. Vicente apparently told Cristina to take Consuelo with her, and Cristina refused, left, and slammed the door. Vicente claimed that shortly after he noticed the door open and didn't hear Consuelo, that he went and looked for her. And that's when he found Consuelo on her back in a grassy area by the carport, and she had blood on her nose and mouth and she was vomiting. According to the detectives, Vicente brought her inside and began cleaning her up, but then noticed that the injury was worse than he thought since her eyes kept rolling. Criminalist Gianna Spencer from the Kern County Regional Laboratories testified about her search of the apartment on November 20th, 1991, and in which that resulted in finding no blood or vomit or indication that either had been cleaned up in the area near the door or outside. She did claim that she found paper towels drenched in vomit and continued on to say that she found no dirt, gravel, or any other substance that you would expect had the vomit been cleaned up outside. She also found a towel that tested positive for blood and semen, consistent with Estela and Vicente, along with bloody tissues in the trash and Vicente's pants that had vomit on them. Now, upon investigating Consuelo's clothes, they found no signs of semen, no tears, and no dirt, and her clothes basically showed that there was no signs of trauma to them. And then another character we're going to introduce is a California Highway Patrol accident investigator that testified that Consuelo would not have landed where she was had it been due to a vehicle hitting her while getting in or out of that carport. He also claimed that had that been the case, her injuries wouldn't have been that severe. And then we have Dr. James Dibdin, who performed Consuelo's autopsy. As I said once before, brace yourself a little bit because it is necessary to go over some of these details, but it is a little upsetting and graphic. Consuelo's death was a result of, quote, a blunt force penetrating injury of the anus that not only lacerated her anus, but also severely damaged her internal organs. In conclusion, he said that Consuelo, had been anally sodomized, and the vaginal tear was the reason for the difficulty in attempting to insert the catheter at the hospital. Dr. Dibdin also concluded that there were several fractured ribs, which he claimed were the result of being tightly gripped from behind. Dr. Dibdin also claimed that he found bruising consistent with thumbs being pressed against her. He claimed that Consuelo had been shaken during the assault, resulting in subdural hematoma and brain swelling. Dr. Dibdin then stated that the facial abrasions were the result of Vicente holding her mouth and that her injuries were inconsistent with a fall or running into something. But Dr. Dibdin, he admitted that he hadn't written up his autopsy results until about 2 months after Consuelo's death and after Vicente had been charged. Remember Dr. Diamond? He's the doctor that examined Consuelo the day after she was transferred to Kern Medical Center. Well, he claimed that he had learned of the tear in the rectum wall from Dibdin's autopsy. He had previously concluded that Consuelo had been sexually assaulted. Now let's get to another doctor, Dr. John Benson, who testified that Consuelo's head injuries were consistent with blows to the head. And the defense, they presented 2 medical experts that testified the opposite of what all of them were saying, and they testified that Consuelo's injuries were consistent with a fall or a car accident, as well as the effects of the various medical procedures that were done during her 8 days in the hospital. So now we got ourselves a little battle of the experts. The defense also presented evidence of plant material that was actually removed from Consuelo's navel passage. Since we're talking about testimonies, might as well hear from Vicente Benavides. And he testified that he was cooking eggs when he went to go look for Consuelo. He found her outside on the ground, throwing up and bleeding from her face. He brought her inside, placed her on the couch, and then he went to retrieve Christina. He said he tried to clean Consuelo's face with toilet paper and kitchen towels for the vomit outside, then tossed the towels in the trash. Vicente admitted that the door opened inward, therefore anyone leaving would have to pull it shut, and agreed that if Consuelo had hit her head on the door, she would have been indoors. But Vicente denied assaulting or inflicting any harm to Consuelo at all. And on April 20th, 1993, Vicente Benavides was convicted of first-degree murder, rape, sodomy, and lewd conduct, inflicting serious injuries, and they imposed the death penalty. And that's where we're going to leave off for now. This has been the first part about Vicente Benavides, and so you need to make sure you stay tuned for the second part, in which we describe everything that happened after he was officially charged in 1993. Make sure to subscribe, like, share, hit that thumbs up or whatever. Also check out the Habeas Corpus Resource Center, and of course the National Registry of Exonerations. Stay tuned for part 2 about Vicente Benavides and what happened after he got convicted in 1993.